It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. The deadline is looming for Governor Evers to sign a new 2-year budget with the fiscal year coming to a close Monday.
While negotiations continue, at least 2 legislative Republicans called for a budget boycott. In a Facebook post, Republican Senate Majority Leader Chris Kapenga says he prefers the option to let the current budget carry over into next year. Here's Kapenga Sunday on WISN's Upfront.
There are so many factors, like I said, that it would be hard to get to a yes. Probably most concerning back to the veto pen, just because I don't know what he could turn that into.
To get an update on where budget talks stand, we turn to WPR's Capitol Bureau Chief Sean Johnson. Sean, welcome back to Wisconsin Today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Joint Finance Committee is expected to meet today. The Budget Writing Committee, budget negotiations have been on and off between Governor Evers and top Republicans. Where do we stand now?
I'm going to give you a little bit of an I don't know kind of answer because it's an unusual budget year in the fact that they are talking with the governor. That just normally doesn't really happen in Wisconsin. That's not how the process has unfolded since 2019, since Governor Tony Evers became governor and Republican legislators have worked with him or kind of against him. This year, they have negotiated with him. Then they stopped. Then Republicans were kind of building the budget themselves. Then it looked like, Senate Republicans didn't have Republican votes to pass it in their chamber. And so it sounds like Assembly Republicans, at least, are again talking with the governor. That now maybe Republicans are going to build the budget themselves again. There's a lot of stuff that could be happening. We'll get a better picture of it potentially after today when the Joint Finance Committee is scheduled to meet. We don't have time in this segment for me to run through every agency that they are going to potentially vote on today because it's a very long list. But there's just weird stuff happening this year in terms of who's going to be who's going to buddy up basically to pass this thing because Senate Republicans not necessarily having the votes to pass it in their chamber has put the GOP in kind of a tough spot.
Well, that's interesting because Republicans narrowly control the state Senate, 18-15. So will they need Democratic votes to get a plan across the finish line? And if that is the case, wouldn't they need to put some things in this budget that Democrats would support?
I think so, yeah. And so they're talking with Evers because, he has shown a willingness to negotiate with Republicans on some big issues like think about, shared revenue or local government funding. Last session, they cut a big deal kind of with Evers taking the lead for Democrats. And if the governor comes out and says, this is a deal I can support, it will put pressure on at least some Democratic senators to say, I don't like everything about this, but I'm going to vote for it. So that's one outcome that could happen. We just haven't seen that really cutting a deal like that since Evers took office. And so I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, but it does, if you take the Republican senators who have said they're likely no's on this thing at their word, Senator Steve Nass and Chris Kapenga, and they have done this before, that, Republicans kind of have to get Democratic support somewhere, at least one vote.
Governor Evers huddling with reporters Wednesday and seemed to express some optimism on the budget. Here he is in De Pere.
We can get this done. We can get this done. We're a state that's a purple state, and that means that everybody has to compromise some. And so I'm looking forward to that happening.
And he also said Monday he wouldn't sign a budget if it doesn't include continued funding for child care providers. How much of a sticking point is that? And are there other specific items holding up this budget?
The child care providers does seem like one of the issues that the governor is kind of willing to stick his neck out on. That if you remember, like at the start of the pandemic or during the pandemic, we'll say the federal government sent Wisconsin hundreds of millions of dollars for this child care subsidy. And numerous child care providers around the state have said, look, if it weren't for that, we would have closed our doors a long time ago. And so the governor has wanted to make that program permanent with state funding. He didn't get it in the last budget, but he had some extra federal funding sitting around that he was able to use to keep it going a bit longer. But that program or that funding is set to expire. And so that is one of the wild cards here in these negotiations.
I
would say normally,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Well, I was just going to add, normally when the governor comes out and, when I heard him kind of say, I'll veto a budget if it doesn't fund childcare, I was expecting Speaker Voss to push back and, respond aggressively, let's say. And you didn't hear that, though. Speaker Voss and Governor Evers are not attacking each other in that way. So that is why it's definitely a different budget year, because an ultimatum like that might be met by another ultimatum in another year, and that's not happening.
So what happens if they go over the deadline? What are some consequences?
So there could be consequences for individual programs like child care counts. If that federal money runs out and there's no extra money sitting around this time for the governor to kind of plug the gap while negotiations continue, there could be consequences. But for, most of state government, nothing happens. That the old budget just rolls over into the new budget. It's not like at the federal government where if you don't hit this deadline, there's a shutdown and, offices close and it's a bit more chaotic. In Wisconsin, the old budget just carries over. And so that gives people like Senators Kapenga and Nass a little bit of leverage to say, look, there's no emergency here. We're just not going to pass budget. It'll be okay. As this drags on, though, if it were to drag on, we don't know if it would.
Sean,
But, go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
I was just going to say thank you so much for this budget update. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Sean Johnson is WPR's Capitol Bureau Chief.
Coming up, a Wisconsin researcher interviewed tween girls about their social media experiences. She tells us what she learned.
Care so much about privacy, but they're also balancing that with this call to be visible.
That's coming up here on WPR News. It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Tween girls today are the same as tween girls from previous generations. They play, they hang out with their friends, and they're at a point in life when they're starting to figure out who they are.
The difference is a lot of their lives now take place online. And social media isn't a separate reality for them, it's just another part of reality.
Our next guest says we often talk about tween girls, but we don't talk to them. So she decided to see what these girls had to say about their social media use, the role it plays in their lives, and if, like so many adults, they also see it as a harmful influence.
Catherine Phelps is the author of the new book, Digital Girlhoods, and teaching faculty in the Gender and Women's Studies Department at UW-Madison. Kate, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a delight.
There's a lot of talk, as you talk about in your book, in the media about young girls, the tween girls, and how they interact with social media. A lot of talk about them.
Yes.
You did something a little different. You went and talked to them.
I
Why
did.
was that such an important part of your research?
Well, and I think rightfully so. It is difficult to access that population of people, that demographic of people, but it really struck me how much public discourse and what felt really very much like panic was happening around girls in online space, and very specifically around this demographic of younger tween girls who are making their foray into these social media spaces and platforms. And I felt that the narrative that we were painting on the part of adults was perhaps not very nuanced. It was a little too simplistic, and I just was like, I need to talk to this group of humans and find out what they think about social media. So I had to be very intentional and careful about the kinds of questions I was crafting in interviews. But what I found was that girls really wanted to talk about it. They wanted the opportunity to share about this thing that they had been introduced to, that they were growing up with, and that was shaping their lives in really profound ways.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that struck me as you share examples, of course, anonymized from the girls you talk to. I think sometimes in the popular press and culture, we think of kids just sort of blundering into this online world thoughtlessly. They really do think a lot about what they see and what they share online, don't they?
They do. They are strategic, savvy social media users. And I was so privileged to get the opportunity to speak with many of them, certainly. And it's not a massive study in that way. I talked to 26 tween girls between the ages of 10 and 13. But what I found was, over the course of doing these interviews, this saturation point where I'm hearing a lot of shared themes. They care so much about privacy, but they're also balancing that with this call to be visible and wanting to represent themselves.
That balancing act keeps going throughout your book, and you look at two conflicting pressures. The idea of girls this age, and other ages for that matter, as innocent girls that need protection, right? And you mentioned the worries about privacy and strangers and concern about that, versus a societal pressure to embrace a kind of girl power.
Yes.
To say, hey, you need to craft your identity. You need to show the world who you are. Those are not the same things. They are mutually contradictory.
Yeah.
How did girls talk about that?
They talked about that dilemma often in the very same breath. Girls understand very much. They have been conditioned to fear this specter, in particular of the strange man online, this predator that looms, And to me, what's so striking about that is that we're putting so much responsibility on a 12-year-old and saying, this person needs to pull themselves offline, or we need to protect them from being in online space because of who might be watching them, which I think needs to be a totally reframed conversation about how we have situated girls throughout history, in media, in popular culture, and these very competing demands that we put on them. It's really hard to be a girl. It's very confusing.
I want to dig more into that in a minute, but I want to stay with some of the practical ways that girls are using social media. There are things where you're kind of broadcasting to the world, like YouTube and the Pretty or Not videos. YouTube, it's gone to other platforms over the years.
Yes.
But you found a lot of what girls are doing with social media is interacting with the same people that they might see at school or in their neighborhood.
Correct. They are primarily communicating with friends, with people that may have gone to school with them that have since moved, that they want to stay in contact with. This is how young people are communicating with each other. And so much of what they're doing is within smaller circles of friends, people that they know. And I think that's really important. And the data and some of the research across explorations into social media and this demographic of adolescent girls or tween girls is demonstrating that. They're not engaging in a bunch of what we might consider to be high-risk behavior. They're having fun with their friends. Yeah.
The girls you talk to also talk about potential negatives of being on social media. A lot of adults certainly worry about cyber bullying.
Yes.
And I thought it was fascinating. Two different girls you talked to had very different. One said, cyber bullying, way worse than in-person bullying because you can't get away from it. One's like, no, in-person bullying, way worse. You just delete that and forget about it. Interesting, different attitudes toward how we deal with bullying on social media.
Yes, and one of the difficulties of this as well is what we as adults might perceive to be bullying. That's a Tuesday for girl, right? Like it may or may not be perceived that way, and they have individual perspective and ideas on what that feels like. I also think it's so important to note that while cyberbullying can and does occur, it is often happening again with people that know each other in real space and real time. And I think it's really crucial to clarify how we have conditioned young girls to relate to one another. When we think about that, it maps so beautifully onto social media use. Things like passive-aggressive behavior, rumor spreading, gossip, silence, character attacks, things like that can move onto social media pretty seamlessly in a way that aggressive behavior in and amongst children is very, very different. And I don't know that we've really deepened our inquiry into that. We need more research that looks at these gender dynamics of bullying online. Yeah.
I'll say, as somebody in the media, I've probably done and accepted more pitches on the bad stuff, right, of kids online. And it's out there, and you acknowledge that in the book. But again, a lot of the girls you talk to talk about what a positive experience, or at least partially positive experience, it is a way to build community, to build relationships with their friends.
Yeah. That's the thing that makes me so nervous about some of what's going on in the world right now. I mean, Australia has passed this bill that will ban young people under the age of 16 from social media over the course of the next year, and other countries are paying attention to that policy-wise. Do not mistake me. I think we need very clear, open dialogue and discussion with our young people about what social media means to them, how they use it, why they use it. I think there are so many important opportunities and possibilities that come with being able to self-represent. That's something that's so striking to me, is we worry about girls in public space. We worry about who might be looking at them. We worry about things like body image comparison and negative body image. This did not come to us from social media. Social media is like an infant. We don't know what its net negative or positive impacts are going to be, and that's something I want to pay attention to in the long term. Girls have fun online. They create videos. They are coders. They are dancers. They are comedians. They're doing incredible content creation, and they get to be a part of it in a way that I think we forget. Girls helped make social media what it is. So I think it's damaging and indeed dangerous, this idea of policing their behavior to such a degree that we're going to pull them offline, because what we're saying is then, by virtue of their gender identity, by virtue of their age, they are automatically high risk. And if that's the case, then we need to be having a very different conversation.
Now, mentioning that Australia law reminds me, we're talking about kids 13 and under, technically by terms of use and things like that. They're not supposed to be there.
Sure aren't. Yep. And yet they are. They are. And they are very prolific online. I think that says a lot to the responsibility and accountability that these platforms need to have in regulating those age limits. But it also says something broader about, in particular, what the last handful of years has meant in the midst and wake of COVID, because this is how young people were communicating when they were pulled out of school. The access that they had to their social networks was primarily through personal devices, or whether family devices or otherwise. And it is true that it is harder to make something like a personal YouTube channel if you are under the age of 13, which also means that a really significant number of the young people, the girls that were making the Pretty or Ugly videos, for example, are using family accounts, are using parental accounts to do that. Certainly finding loopholes, getting past those regulations, because this is the modus operandi of how this generation is connecting with one another. And kind of whether we like it or not, we need to reckon with what that means.
Talking to Kate Phelps from UW-Madison, author of the new book, Digital Girlhoods. I'm going to do a little read from your book here. Popular culture and mass media tell girls to be confident, but not too confident, be vulnerable, but do not show too much of yourself online, Be authentic, but only in appropriately self-effacing ways. Be pretty, but not vain. Be thin, but not too thin, but certainly not fat. Be smart, but not too smart. Be active, but do not bypass the boys. Be a leader, but in a suitably feminine way. Be sexy, but not slutty. Okay, if I took the word online out there, I bet that would sound very familiar to women of a number of generations before social media ever came around.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is not new. Me naming these paradoxes, this set of contradictions that not only girls of a variety of identities and embodiments are experiencing, but this is something that is experienced across the life course for people that identify as female and feminine. And these sets of contradictions are something that have colored the experiences of women and girls in particular for a very long time, especially as women and girls have gained seemingly more political power. I think ideologically we're very on board with this girl power idea. But it's something that we're selling, and we're selling individual empowerment, in particular through consumption. We do that through very recognizable brands, and girls are drawn to that. And then we turn right around and we say, wait a minute, this interest in makeup is so vapid, is so shallow. But what? We're laying that bare for girls. We are selling it to them. And then we turn around and disdain that interest primarily because we've associated it with femininity. I think this sort of reclamation of femininity and what girls are doing online and how they are performing girlhoods is so powerful. There's agency there. There's disruption. There's the creation of new narratives and counter narratives that cuts through some of this because girls know, they recognize this seemingly endless series of contradictions about who they're supposed to be and how. And the ability to represent themselves on these platforms demonstrate their interests, their depth, their value, what they find meaningful. I think there's a lot to pay attention to. If we're interested in who girls are and what they're doing, they're telling us. We just have to value it enough to look at it.
Looking at it from a grown-up perspective now, in a lot of ways, the arguments we're having about social media are, like you say, the things we were talking about before social media. I and a lot of people were parents in an age where our kids were hitting social media, and I couldn't look back and say, well, when I was a kid on social media, because there wasn't social media when I was a kid, it feels really dramatically different. How do you split that? How do you maybe bring those two generations together?
Girls are already having really meaningful conversations with parental figures, with caretakers, with stakeholders in their lives, with their peers about privacy, about how they make content public versus private, how they talk about it with their friends. I think we need to give them more credit, and that is a very noticeable pattern of, I catch myself doing it too, of well, it wasn't like this when I was a kid. That is a tale as old as time, right? And some of the moral panic behind it. This idea that social media is the Wild West in this totally unregulated space. I think we need to give girls more credit, but also open ourselves up to what girls have to say. I think about one of my interviews, several of them spoke to ideas around this, but a 12-year-old Black girl named Jessie, who really stands out in my mind, had so much energy around this idea of creating a YouTube channel for dance and for doing choreography. She had a conversation with her mother about what that would look like and had a whole plan because she knew that in order to be recognized for this skill, she had to utilize an online platform. She knew that. And she's absolutely right. That is the space that we are in. How can we keep this safe in ways that also allow you to experience the benefits of it, because most of us are using these platforms, right? Like, they're here. So let's figure out how girls can be a part of that and continue to be a part of that.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to get to be able to talk about it. And tween girls are awesome. I just want to end it there. Thank you.
Catherine Phelps is the author of the new book, Digital Girlhoods, and a lecturer in the Gender and Women's Studies Department at UW-Madison. Her book analyzes conversations she had with preteen girls about how they use social media and the role it plays in their lives. If you're a parent or a kid, have you had conversations in your family about how you use or shouldn't use social media? Tell us about it. Email wisconsintoday@wpr.org. Again, that's wisconsintoday@wpr.org.
Coming up in a new TV show, the dead are rising in Wausau. Comic book creator Tim Seeley is from Wisconsin. He tells us what it took to adapt his comic series Revival for the small screen.
This has to be set in Wausau. It has to be kind of funny, which was important for us because people in Wisconsin are funny.
That's next on Wisconsin Today. You're listening to Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. It's time for Wisconsin Life. Here's producer Bridget Bowden with a story about hiking Wisconsin's state parks with a dog. It's part of WPR's Wisconsin Road Trip series, which features pit stops across the state to explore some of the people, places, and things that make Wisconsin summers special.
Wisconsin state parks are full of wonders for human visitors and for their dogs as well. WPR's Anya Van Wagtendonk recently went to Natural Bridge State Park to learn more about the best ways to get outside with our four-legged friends.
Danielle St. Louis literally wrote the book on how to explore Wisconsin with your dog. Her Dog Lover's Guide to Hiking Wisconsin State Parks has tips and tricks for finding dog-friendly trails and beaches in all of Wisconsin's 50 state parks.
With a dog is how I first experienced most of Wisconsin state parks.
That dog was named Lucky, and St. Louis describes him as probably a Border Collie Lab mix and definitely a dog with big feelings. That meant sometimes he got nervous or reactive when out in the world, and that meant St. Louis needed to do a whole lot of research every time they went out.
I still really needed to know a lot of information about where we were going before we went there. And when I wanted to take him to state parks, I couldn't find information that I wanted about the trails, like how wide are they, what kind of materials are on the trails.
So St. Louis started taking Lucky out to do that firsthand research and then wrote a book to help others like them. Lucky died in 2023, aged 14. These days, St. Louis carries him with her when she's out on the trail in the form of 2 tattoos, one on each thigh.
So that's Lucky and Passenger Pigeons, Wyalusing State Park. And then this is Lucky and my niece dog, Yodi.
Like on a recent warm Saturday when she hit up Natural Bridge State Park in Sauk County with her friends Anna Schursel and Ellen Wargowski. Schursel brought along Rizzo, and Wargowski brought along Bailey. The friends first bonded in classes designed for big-feelinged dogs. Now, when they go out together, they practice staying calm and focused when critters go by or when loud noises start up. Much of this trail is narrow, hugged tight by glowing green tree branches. Then, kind of suddenly, it widens, and there's the natural bridge. The sandstone arch looms overhead, dripping vines and somehow sprouting small trees from its crags. Underneath, a deep, dark inlet was once used as a shelter by the earliest humans to settle the Americas. St. Louis said these kinds of natural wonders are what make exploring Wisconsin state parks so special.
Wild to think that like early humans were living here, and it's not that far from like my suburban house in Fitchburg.
That kind of history pervades Wisconsin State Park System, which is celebrating its 125th anniversary. St. Louis says all that history means visitors have a responsibility.
Just be respectful. Like, if we want to have these public places, we all need to be conscientious of how we're using them and of the other people that are using them.
Back in the parking lot at the end of the hike, St. Louis has one more important piece of wisdom for any would-be dog hikers.
Tick checks. So I love to talk about tick checks. Ticks have been found on dogs in Wisconsin every month of the year. So no matter when you're out in the woods, do a tick check.
St. Louis remembers a time with Lucky that she didn't do a tick check and ended up back home with her dog in the bath as she pulled off tick after tick after tick. She wondered if she was up for all the challenges of the outdoor unknown. But then, she said, she got over it, because like anything else, getting out in the world takes practice and time and mistakes. But it's worth it.
WPR's Anya Van Wagtendonk brought us that story on hiking with dogs. Wisconsin Life is a co-production of Wisconsin Public Radio and PBS Wisconsin. Additional support comes from Lowell and Mary Peterson of Appleton. I'm Bridget Bowden.
Join us every Friday this summer for more Wisconsin road trips. To see all the stops and plan your own road trip, find the series page at wpr.org/roadtrip. In a new TV series, the dead are rising, but only in Wausau.
TV's newest zombie drama, Revival, brings us home to Wisconsin with a new twist on the undead.
It starts with a wintry day in Wausau when the dead rise up in cemeteries and morgues.
You may have seen these undead Wisconsinites in Revival before on the shelves at your local comic book store.
Originally from Ringgold in Marathon County, Tim Seeley wrote and co-created the Revival comic book series, one of several notable comics under his belt, including Nightwing, Local Man, and the forthcoming Godzilla series. The Revival TV show based on his work is on the Sci-Fi Channel and on Peacock. Tim, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Now, what I love about Revival, Tim, is it's a different approach to zombies. It's not sort of that brainless, brain-eating dead. Without giving too much away, what can you tell us about your approach to zombies and the lore in Revival?
I mean, a big approach for us to the lore and history of zombies was that, generally speaking, zombie stories are sort of survival stories, and they're sort of more about the collapse of society, and they're, often kind of feature, characters sort of having to deal with trust issues about other people. And we kind of wanted to take a different tack with it because we felt like that story had been done to death and done best by the guy who did it first, which was George Romero or Richard Matheson, I guess, if you want to go back to I Am Legend. But so our take was to do, what would it be like to do a undead story about having to live with people that you've already, said goodbye to. So our story involves people who come back from the dead, but they seem, at least at first, to be completely themselves. But as the story unfolds, we see what caused this event to happen and what it did to the people. And a bigger thing we want to do also is that, not every person who comes back, we call them revivers in our story, is exactly the same. They all sort of react to this event differently, and how they deal with that and how they deal with the people that they come back to is a big part of our story.
And the story is set in Wisconsin. You're from Wisconsin. What made you want to situate this this twist on the zombie story in your home state?
A big part of it was, the old advice, write what you know. And I grew up in the Wausau area. I still go back there for holidays and stuff. I have family there. So, I didn't have to do any research, which is always nice. Saves a lot of time. But I also kind of felt like my hometown in particular is such a sort of slice of America, sort of politically, it's pretty purple. It's not like a far rural Wisconsin place that's all conservative. It's not a city like Madison that's all liberal. So it had that, and so that meant I could do different reactions to this. And I also really like the idea of setting this in the winter, which Wausau, at least when I was a kid, got pretty severely. Things have changed somewhat with climate change, but because being stuck inside during an event like this kind of felt like the way we experience these kind of things. And I also just wanted to deal with that sort of sensation of cabin fever. When we started this book in 2012, I didn't know that, within 7 years or so, I'd be stuck in the house for an entire year. But at the time, the idea of, being stuck in the house for the winter, which happened a lot, would make for a scarier and potentially more tense story.
We're talking to Tim Seeley, writer, co-creator of the Wausau-based comic book series Revival, talking about the new made-for-TV adaptation of the comics. It's on now on Sci-Fi and Peacock. Tim, converted to TV. Now, there's no guarantee that, when something goes on to TV or movies, that it's going to exactly match your vision. Was there any sort of talk, any pushback in the idea of setting this in Wisconsin, or was this part of the TV adaptation right from the start?
Oh, yeah. This was from the very beginning, a decision that, the producers really wanted to stick to. And on the upside, this is, as an adaptation, I think a lot of times the stories you hear from comic book creators is, kind of how separate they are from those adaptations. And, at worst, he's sort of just somebody who gets a check and then the show turns up on TV and you watch it like everybody else. But for this, I was involved from the very beginning. That was a conscientious just choice between Mike Norton, the artist, and myself, that we would be involved the entire time. So, for the entire 8 years that the process that Luke and Aaron and Brett worked on this series, we were there. So, every conversation that came up, we were privy to it. We knew what was going to be changed. We knew the things that were considered the untouchables, like this has to be set in Wausau. It has to be about the two sisters more than anything. It has to be kind of funny, which was important for us because people in Wisconsin are funny. And that was something that we didn't want to change. And all those things, the things that we considered, unchangeable remained from the very beginning.
Now, I understand a lot of the exterior filming happened in Wausau, and it looks like Wausau as I watch it, filmed in Canada, like a lot of our pop culture is nowadays. But what struck me is, as I'm meeting the characters here, I could see those people, right, in Wisconsin. They rang true to me. How about you, as you saw the casting happen and you saw this start to emerge on screen?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and a big part of it is that, Canada is not that far from Wisconsin, not distance-wise nor culture-wise. And, a big early conversation we had was about casting and, if these people looked like they could live there. And I think we got that pretty well figured out. And then another big question was, were we going to do the accent? And we decided not to, because it could sort of veer into, farce or parody. But some of those people just have that accent. Mm-hmm. So, the northern Wisconsin accent is remarkably similar to like lower Canada. So, it feels very authentic because of that, I think. And, for a lot of those actors, that was a chance just to talk like themselves instead of having to appropriate, American Los Angeles accent or American New York or American Southern accent.
Well, and it has struck me sometimes when you see Wisconsin in pop culture, it's that stereotype, oh, real sorry, got to eat your brain there kind of thing. And that I didn't feel like this is a stereotypical Wisconsin.
I mean, Wisconsinites do say, oh, so I'm not going to say that's a stereotype. But yeah, we made a sort of choice with the comic that we be authentic, but not insulting. I think there's an honesty in sort of approaching some of the very cultural things that are specific to Wisconsin. And having grown up there, having lived in Chicago for, 23 years at this point, there are things I definitely know to be very specific to when I go back and visit Wausau or, go to the North Woods and I didn't want to be dishonest about those. I think that stuff, is really, really important. And also just it gives a place. The place has character, which I think is a very important part of stories is, you feel the authenticity and honesty, in the depiction of a place. And you can smell pretty quickly if this doesn't feel right.
Tim, the characters, the names in the TV show, I noticed one line, somebody needs a babysitter, maybe. I'll get the Seeleys to watch Cooper. Yeah. How did your last name end up as an offstage character?
The writer of the first pilot is a good friend of mine, Mike Morsi. And so I think that was a little wink and a nod that survived very many edits of the scripts.
What is it like to have that vision and have somebody else do a TV show?
It's drastically different. I mean, it's first getting used to these people, being the face of your characters. I'll like seeing CM Punk walk out as a character I made up was a pretty shocking moment in my life. And to completely embody that total jerk was really awesome.
And Revival was your take on the zombie story. I understand you are now working on Godzilla.
Yeah. Comics is crazy that way. You can do a job and someone will read your crime zombie story and say, this guy would probably be good for giant Japanese kaiju. So I have seen all those movies, so I was ready to go.
Well, now there's an old board game called The Creature That Ate Sheboygan. Is Godzilla coming to Wisconsin in this new treatment? Please say yes.
I mean, sooner or later, I have to have Godzilla stomp on everything. But no Wisconsin yet. I'll have to
maybe a
make
detour.
Sure that happens. Yeah, maybe a little detour eventually.
Tim, congratulations on the show, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was Tim Seeley, originally from Ringgold in Marathon County. Tim is the writer and co-creator of the Wausau-based comic book series Revival, among others. We talked about the new made-for-TV adaptation of Revival. It's now airing weekly on Sci-Fi. You can also stream it on Peacock. And we want to hear from you. Do you have a favorite bit of fiction, a book, TV, movie, or otherwise set here in Wisconsin? Doesn't have to involve zombies, though it can. Tell us about it. You can email wisconsintoday@wpr.org. That's wisconsintoday@wpr.org. Or is there a bit of pop culture you think got Wisconsin completely wrong? You can tell us that too. Again, wisconsintoday@wpr.org.
Thank you to everyone who donated during our June one-day member drive.
Support from people like Nicole and Ashlyn and Denise and Boyd makes WPR's essential service possible. And we heard a lot of great feedback when people gave, like listening to WPR for my updates on the news, as well as interesting stories about my Wisconsin community, is a daily must.
If you missed the member drive, there's still time to join in with your gift at WPR.org.
You play a huge role in keeping Wisconsin informed, inspired, and connected. Thank you.
Wisconsin Today producers include Royce Podeswa, Colleen Leahy, and Avery Lee Rogers. Our technical director is Tyler Ditter.
Tim Peterson is managing producer, and Dean Knetter is our executive producer. Learn more about us at wpr.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Ferret.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. You're listening to WPR News.